Felipe's strict rule for Leonor's marriage. Somewhere out there, Princess Leonor of Spain will eventually fall in love with someone, get engaged, and plan a wedding. And when that happens, her father, King Felipe VI, holds something almost no other parent on earth holds. Not just an opinion, not just a blessing to withhold out of hurt feelings. A constitutional power, written into Spanish law since 1978, sitting quietly in Article 57, is a rule that says if Leonor marries against the expressed prohibition of the king, she can be permanently stripped of her place in the line of succession, along with every child she ever has. Not grounded, not lectured, erased from the family tree that matters most, the one that decides who rules Spain. That's the headline, but the real story is more complicated, and more interesting, than, the king can veto his daughter's husband. Because he can't, not alone. And understanding exactly how this rule works, why it exists, where it came from, and what would actually have to happen for it to be used, tells you far more about the modern Spanish monarchy than the simple version ever could. Let's start with the text itself. Article 57, paragraph 4, of the Spanish Constitution states that any person with succession rights who marries against the express prohibition of the king in the Cortes Generales shall be excluded from succession to the crown, and so shall their descendants. Read that again, slowly, because the wording matters. It doesn't say, the king's prohibition. It says the prohibition of the king and the Cortes Generales, together. The Cortes Generales is Spain's parliament, the Congress of Deputies and the Senate combined. For this clause to actually strip someone of their succession rights, both the monarch and the elected legislature have to object. Felipe alone, no matter how strongly he disapproves of a match, cannot exercise this power by himself. He needs Spain's democratically elected government to agree with him. That single detail changes the entire character of the rule. This isn't a medieval veto sitting entirely in one man's hands. It's a shared check, built specifically so that the fate of the royal succession can't be decided on a king's personal whim. If Felipe woke up tomorrow and decided he simply didn't like Leonor's choice of partner for reasons of taste, ego, or old family grudges, that dislike means nothing constitutionally unless he can also convince the Spanish parliament, elected by the public, to formally back him. In a country where, according to recent polling, roughly half of Spaniards or more have expressed openness to becoming a republic at various points over the past few years, that's not a rubber stamp he could count on getting for a personal disagreement. The Cortes Generales would need an actual reason to view a marriage as damaging enough to the institution to justify permanently altering the line of succession. So why does a clause like this exist at all, if it's this hard to actually use? To answer that, you have to go back to what this article was designed to prevent, and it wasn't romantic disapproval. It was political and dynastic risk. A marriage that could compromise Spain's constitutional order, for instance to someone with a serious criminal history, someone tied to a hostile foreign government in a way that raised sovereignty concerns, or someone whose presence at the side of a future head of state could genuinely destabilize the institution. The framers of the 1978 Constitution were writing in the shadow of Spain's transition out of the Franco dictatorship, trying to build a monarchy that could survive as a stabilizing, symbolic institution inside a brand new democracy. Article 57.4 wasn't there to let a father control his daughter's love life. It was there as a last resort safeguard against a marriage that could threaten the constitutional settlement itself. Which is exactly why it's never been used. Not once, in the entire history of the modern monarchy, has this clause actually been invoked to strip someone of succession rights. Felipe's own marriage to Letizia Ortiz, a divorced television journalist with no aristocratic background whatsoever, could easily have been the kind of match that provoked controversy in an earlier era of the monarchy. It wasn't blocked. It wasn't even seriously threatened under this clause. The family and the institution absorbed the fact that their future queen consort came from outside the traditional pool of royal or noble brides, and the country, by and large, moved on. That's the actual precedent Leonor is working from, not a family history of vetoed marriages, but a family history of eventually accepting a partner who didn't fit the old mold, once that partner was formally introduced and the relationship was ready to be public. There is one moment in this family's recent past, though, that shows what happens when a royal marriage decision does become genuinely contentious, even without invoking Article 57.4 directly. In 2014, Felipe's own sister, Infanta Cristina, and her husband Iñaki Urdangarin became the subject of a major corruption investigation, the Noose case, tied to misuse of public funds through a foundation Urdangarin ran. It wasn't Cristina's marriage itself that triggered a constitutional crisis, since Article 57.4 only concerns those with active succession rights getting married, and by then this was about conduct after marriage, not the marriage itself. But the fallout was severe enough that Felipe, shortly after becoming king that same year, formally stripped Cristina of her title as Duchess of Palma de Mallorca, an extraordinary and rare move. It shows that when a spouse's conduct threatens the reputation of the crown, the institution has other tools available beyond Article 57.4, and it has used them. That episode looms in the background of how seriously the family treats the question of who marries in. Now bring that history forward to Leonor specifically, and you start to see why this clause, even though it's never been triggered, matters more for her than it did for almost anyone else in the family's recent past. She isn't a sibling of the monarch, like Cristina was. She isn't even simply the heir the way Felipe himself was for decades, waiting out a long, stable reign before his own succession became relevant. Leonor swore her oath to the Constitution on her 18th birthday, in October 2023, formally acquiring the full legal capacity to succeed her father as head of state at any moment his reign ends. That oath made the abstract question of who she eventually marries into something with immediate constitutional weight, not a hypothetical decades away. And there's a reason this clause gets discussed constantly regarding Leonor specifically, more than it ever was for her father. Felipe became king in 2014, following his own father Juan Carlos's abdication, at a moment when the institution needed to project stability after years of scandal. Leonor is stepping into a Spain where monarchy support has been genuinely contested in recent polling, sometimes hovering close to even with Republican sentiment. Every choice she makes as she approaches adulthood is being read, by commentators across the political spectrum, as evidence for or against the monarchy's continued relevance. A marriage that even appeared controversial, whether over the partner's background, politics, or conduct, wouldn't need Article 57.4 to be invoked to do damage. The public conversation alone, in a country this divided on the monarchy's future, could be destabilizing on its own. That's likely a major part of why the royal household has kept her personal life under such tight wraps as she's grown up, something we've covered in detail in a previous video. The less speculation there is to work with, the less risk there is of that speculation becoming a genuine political liability before any real relationship even exists. So what would it actually take, practically, for Article 57.4 to ever be used against Leonor? It would require, first, a specific partner, formally identified. Second, a decision by Felipe, as reigning monarch at that time, to formally and expressly prohibit the marriage, not privately but as a constitutional act. And third, agreement from the Cortes Generales, meaning both houses of a democratically elected Spanish parliament would need to back that prohibition. Given that no monarch in this family's modern history has taken that first step, even in situations involving genuine scandal like the Urdangarin case, and given how high the political bar would be to get parliamentary backing, this remains, by design, an emergency mechanism rather than an active tool anyone expects to see used in Leonor's lifetime. What's far more likely, based on everything this family's history shows us, is a repeat of the pattern set by Felipe and Letizia. Total privacy during the courtship, no confirmation, no leaks the family authorizes, right up until the relationship is stable and serious enough that the family is ready to control the announcement themselves, on their own timeline, likely with an engagement announced only once they're confident it won't trigger the kind of scrutiny that could ever bring Article 57.4 anywhere near a real conversation. It's worth stepping back and appreciating what this constitutional structure actually represents, beyond the headline-friendly version of "the king can block his daughter's marriage." It's a rule built by a country that had just emerged from dictatorship, designed to give a fragile new monarchy one last emergency break against a truly destabilizing match, while deliberately making that break require the consent of the elected government, not just royal will. It's never been pulled. The family's own history, including Felipe's marriage to a divorced commoner journalist, suggests the institution has repeatedly chosen adaptation over rigid restriction when it comes to actual love matches. And the political reality of a genuinely divided modern Spain makes it harder, not easier, for any future monarch to unilaterally impose that kind of restriction and expect Parliament to simply go along with it. So the honest answer to what Felipe's rule for Leonor's marriage actually isn't, he gets veto power. It's that Spain built a shared, rarely touched safeguard nearly 50 years ago, one that has sat quietly in the background through every royal wedding since, used by exactly nobody, and that the real force shaping who Leonor eventually marries probably won't be a constitutional clause at all. It will be the same instinct for total discretion that shaped her parents' courtship, kept tight until the family is ready to tell the story on their own terms. A brief sourcing note. The text and mechanics of Article 57.4, requiring both the King's and the Cortes Generales' prohibition, are drawn directly from the Spanish Constitution of 1978. The historical context around the article's drafting during Spain's democratic transition, the precedent of Felipe and Letitia's marriage, Leonor's constitutional oath on her 18th birthday in 2023, and the Cristina and Urdangarin case and its consequences are all matters of established public record. Current polling on Spanish monarchist versus Republican sentiment reflects recent published survey data and can shift over time. Anything in this script framed as likely or probable, including predictions about how a future relationship might be handled, is explicitly presented as informed interpretation, not confirmed fact.